going to start. There you go. You have been forewarned. We are recording. So I think, as I said, I know many of you here, not all. So I will introduce myself first and then let you know who we are going to be hearing from today. So I am Heidi Alexander, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the director of the SJC Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing. And this is the, and if I didn't say Massachusetts, I meant to say Massachusetts, because I know that we have folks tuning in from outside of Massachusetts, and we welcome you. Happy to have you here. This is the Legal Wellbeing Network. We have been meeting every other month for nearly 2 years now. We draw a diverse group of people, all committed to improving well-being in the profession. What we do is we try to bring in presenters that can share information to you that will be helpful to you, to your workplaces, and to your efforts towards improving well-being, whether that be organizationally or individually. We have been working to create a repository of resources from these meetings. So we have the recordings and materials that are available on our website. We'll put that link into the chat, but you've probably been there since you registered, but all the recordings are there. So if you'd like to take a look at any past recordings. So in February, we heard from Shalini George, who is a professor at Suffolk Law, and she spoke about her scholarship in the areas of lawyer well-being, mindfulness, and the cognitive science of learning, as well as this innovative course that she is offering, a 1L course at Suffolk with Professor Lyle Baker on professional identity, that I believe the hope is to have this be a mandatory course for 1Ls at Suffolk. So we are hopeful for that. And we also had Amanda Rowan, which some of you may know, who is assistant clerk in Middlesex Superior Court, who is involved in many different well-being initiatives and passionate about reducing stigma in the profession. So she spoke about her lived experiences. And she is also working on a series for Mass Lawyers Weekly that highlights lawyers and leaders who speak about their lived experiences and challenges. And so I would encourage you to take a look for those. Some of those have been posted in the past, and thank you for those who have contributed to those articles. So before we hear from our speakers today, which is why you're all here, I just want to remind everyone to save the dates May 2nd through 6th, if you haven't already, for Wellbeing Week in Law. This is the 3rd annual event, and we have many activities being offered by the Standing Committee in collaboration with local bar associations, the Institute for Wellbeing in Law, which is a national 501c3 organization, and the American Bar Association. So I do want to just share my screen real quickly so that you can see some of the wonderful things happening. All right, hopefully that's the right screen. So this is, we have a full schedule of what is going on during Wellbeing Week in the Law. And as you can see, we have a keynote speaker on Tuesday evening, May 3rd at 6 p.m. And again, this is not only open to people in Massachusetts. Anyone can join this. These are free events. And so we have this keynote speaker on May 3rd, Eileen Zimmerman, who some of you may recognize. She is a New York Times columnist. She wrote The Lawyer, the Addict, which was a piece about her husband who suffered from addiction. And then she turned that into a book called Smacked, Story of White Collar Ambition, Addiction, and Tragedy. So I'd encourage you to join that event. And then we also have a special event that Friday at noon, May 6th at 12 p.m. with Michael Curry. Some of you may recognize that name. He is the CEO of the Massachusetts League of Community Health Centers, and he's going to speak on the intersection of mental health and the BIPOC community. So two very, very exciting events. And then you'll see every day we have many, many different activities for you to participate. Obviously, we don't expect people to participate in everything, but these are just a few different offerings, including some community coffee breaks, which we've offered in the past, which have been wonderful, to hear from everyone in the community, just to kind of connect with others and share their experiences. So we have a couple of those. We have some meditation sessions with Mindfulness and Law Society. I see Lori Capello here, who is one of the chairs of the New England chapter Mindfulness and Law Society. We also have on Thursday here, we have a session with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers and Tracy Myers, who's a clinician, on mindfulness, movement, and self-compassion at work. So something a little bit different from yoga, but things that you can actually do while you're just sitting in your chair. So that's exciting. And then, of course, every day there are, as you'll see here, suggested.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. This is Jerry Muir.
Oh, hi, Jerry.
Oh.
I don't know if that was to us or not, but hi, Jerry. So we have suggested daily readings, videos, and activities, and those all come from the Institute for Wellbeing in Law. So those are things that you can share with your own communities, your networks, your workplaces, and we would encourage you to do so. And you'll get emails from me about this later, but I just wanted to make sure that you all knew what was happening very, very soon. All right. So I want to jump in to the substance of this meeting, because I am very, very excited to hear from our speakers here. We do have a few speakers, and then we'll move into breakouts at the very end. We'll also reserve time for Q&A and discussion after each speaker, like we usually do. So first, I want to introduce Lisa Kirby, who is the Chief Intelligence and Knowledge Sharing Officer at Diversity Lab. Diversity Lab is an incubator of ideas and solutions that boost diversity and inclusion in law. Many of their experimental ideas have been created through hackathons and piloted across the country. And Lisa has assisted in founding one of their more well-known initiatives, the Mansfield Rule, which encourages law firms and legal organizations to consider a diverse slate of candidates for roles, committees, and leadership activities. So, Lisa, we are very, very happy to have you here, and I am hoping you will share more about yourself and your role and what you are doing over at Diversity Lab. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I actually live outside Boston, so it is nice to do something local. When we do so much all over the country at Diversity Lab, and we're all remote, so we live all over the country. So it is really nice to do something local once in a while. But I also love that so much has moved to Zoom, and so it is extremely convenient to meet with all of you, who I know not all of you are in Massachusetts. So yes, I am. Thanks for the intro, Heidi, and nice to see all of you. I see some familiar names and faces. I see Richard Soden, who I worked with years ago at Goodwin. So nice to see all of you. And I am a recovering lawyer. I practice law at two large firms. Actually, I started my career in Boston at Choate. That was my first legal job many years ago. And then I've worked for a while in the talent and diversity space in law firms. And I worked for a consulting company that did strategic law firm consulting. And I have been with Diversity Lab for 6 years. And As Heidi mentioned, I helped launch the Mansfield Rule, and I also lead some of our other programs, including the On-Ramp Fellowship. So I wear a few hats, but I am happy to be here to talk about the Mansfield Rule. So, and also apologies in advance, because as I mentioned to Heidi, I have to run after. I can't stay for the entire meeting, although I actually probably will watch the recording because I know we have such other great speakers lined up as well. And also, I really appreciated hearing about the week of lawyer well-being. I am going to forward that information to all my friends. My husband's a practicing lawyer, and all of that looks really great too. So glad to get plugged into all of this. I'll talk a little about the Mansfield Rule. Please feel free to chime in with questions in the chat or raise your hand and I can answer them. So we started the Mansfield Rule started as a winning idea from the Women in Law Hackathon that Diversity Lab organized at Stanford Law School in 2016. So and we brought together, we started the hackathon because we wanted to take a different approach to solving some of the most vexing problems of equity in the law and wanted to borrow from the tech industry. Now you see hackathons all the time, but this was the first ever legal hackathon. And the idea was originally inspired by the Rooney Rule in the NFL, which requires, as has been in the news a lot recently, and it's changed a little, but it originally required one minority candidate or one underrepresented candidate for head coach positions, but it has morphed and been supersized and taken on a very different shape from that original inspiration. It was named after Arabella Mansfield, the first woman admitted to the practice of law in the US, by the way. And so let's see. We ask firms, so the Mansfield Rule asks firms to consider at least 30% underrepresented candidates for leadership roles, promotions, participation in client pitches, and other things that I can explain later. The reason that we chose the 30% number is that everything we do at Diversity Lab is based on research, and research shows that you need at least 30%, a real critical mass, to, in any given candidate pool, to move past a tokenism dynamic, which if you have only one person that is not a member of the majority in a candidate pool, then you risk falling into a tokenism dynamic, and to really change mindsets. So 30% is the percentage. I should say too, we launched the Mansfield Rule. So after the winning idea, we developed it into something that could be implemented in firms. We launched with about 40 firms in 2017. We now have 165 large firms participating, about 100 mid-sized law firms in the mid-sized Mansfield Rule. We have about 75 legal departments in the Mansfield Rule Legal Department Edition. And we also have a UK. We're piloting it in the UK this year with about 10 UK firms. So that's kind of where things stand right now as the Mansfield Rule has caught on. The goal of the Mansfield Rule, of course, is to increase the representation of diverse lawyers in leadership by broadening the pool of historically underrepresented lawyers who are considered for these governance roles. And we include as historically underrepresented women lawyers, underrepresented racial and ethnic lawyers, LGBTQ+ lawyers, and lawyers with disabilities. And there are 4 foundational elements to the Mansfield Rule that I think have been really important to why it has caught on and actually affected change. So the first is tracking and documenting diversity. And that is not the most interesting or sort of exciting part. So I think it tends to get skipped over a little when we talk about the Mansfield Rule or when you hear about it. But tracking and documenting diversity is not something that most firms were doing up until 5 or so years ago, or were willing to consider doing for various reasons, because the focus was really so much more on avoiding any sort of potential liability for any kind of lawsuit down the road, rather than a proactive focus on building an inclusive culture. And so that mindset shifted. And so tracking and documenting diversity, and I always say to firms, they feel like in their first few months, oh, we're not seeing any results yet, or, we haven't done anything great. I'm like, the fact that you're writing down and keeping track of your candidate pools for senior level recruiting and promotions is a huge step forward. You cannot, we all know the phrase, you get what you measure. You really don't know what you need to work on until you can see what, how your candidate pools are tracking and how the demographics are playing out in all of these different activities. So tracking and documenting diversity. And also one thing I always like to stress is that the Mansfield Rule is not one of these certifications or awards or pledges or things that you maybe hand in a form once a year and hear back and then, kind of go on with whatever you were doing. It's a 12-month rigorous collaboration between the participating firms and diversity labs. So the accountability and collaboration are built in. And so one of our important foundational elements is working together as a community and knowledge sharing. So we think that rather than trying to make progress in isolation, firms and legal departments can make a lot more, move the needle faster and more effectively if they are working together and sharing knowledge. And most of the participants say that our knowledge sharing structure, our knowledge sharing calls and our check-ins and the resources we share are one of the most valuable parts of participating. And we have some very robust calls with a lot of open sharing. I will say that was new, especially for a lot of the practicing lawyers who participate. They're used to seeing other firms as competitors, but they have openly shared lessons learned, ideas on how to improve. So it's really kind of cool to see all the firms working together. We also have a really robust resource library of documents that participants have created to help track and document or implement the Mansfield Rule in another way. And they have shared those so that and we require them to share something to the resource library that's built into it, but it actually works really well. And the other two foundational elements are, of course, expanding leaders' awareness of who could be a leader. So by sort of being forced to consider a broader field, they're forced to really consider who could be a leader. It's not just who might automatically come to mind as fitting the mold of a leader in this firm or somebody that looks like them or doesn't look like them or whatever it may be, but they're forced to consider a broader field. And finally, another really important goal is adding transparency to the processes of succession planning and promotions in law firms, which have historically been very opaque and a little hard to pin down. And what happens in, as you all know, in organizations with processes that are not clear, usually there's an in-group in these organizations. It's sort of a social science finding that in almost any group or culture, you have an in-group and an out-group. And members of the in-group tend to have more access to the inside scoop on how things work and how succession planning works, how you throw your hat in the ring, or what you kind of need to do beforehand to rise to that level. So it was really important to us to not just have 30% consideration, but couple that with transparency. So we require firms to publish internally both sort of job descriptions for leadership roles, so everyone can see this is what they do day to day, week to week, and these are the specific tasks involved in these roles, and also publish the processes for being promoted. So, you have to have done X number of years on this kind of committee to be promoted to executive committee. You have to be an equity partner. You have to, blah, 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 so that all lawyers can try to, can have that in mind as they plan their career trajectories. And we did get a little bit of pushback from some firms on this at first, and we sometimes do from newer firms, because sometimes they're like, well, why do all lawyers need to know this? Or why does everyone in the firm? How about just, I just share this with equity partners? And we say, no, because you have to, even the newest lawyer, entry-level lawyers, for them to see, how leaders are chosen, how it all works. That helps them plan their career. By the time they're an equity partner, they've already figured out how it all works for the most part, and they're already on the inside. So to be truly inclusive, it really has to be transparent to everyone. So we iterate the Mansfield rule every year. That's another important component. We follow design thinking principles. Those were the foundations of the hackathon, and we've carried that through. So every year we work with an advisory group of participating firms to understand their feedback, and then work through proposals to make sure we're keeping raising the bar and making sure the Mansfield rule is functioning as inclusively and effectively as possible. So it's never been the same thing every year. We've always added new components to it, new categories. We've gradually made it more challenging to become certified. And so it's constantly evolving according to feedback from the firms and goals and what we want to achieve, and based on data and research and so forth. And we regularly consult with experts to learn more about different areas. When we added lawyers with disabilities, for example, we worked with some disability rights lawyers and the ABA Commission on Lawyers with Disabilities to learn more about how firms could best support lawyers with disabilities and recruit them effectively and so forth. So just one example. Let's see. Let me just check my notes and see if I've left anything out. I do want to mention this at the end of, so this is a 12-month rigorous collaboration. As I mentioned, we gather data throughout. So we have check-ins with each participating firm or legal department at the 3-month and the 6-month mark. And we also gather data at a survey at the 6-month mark. And that's a really important part of everything we do at Diversity Lab, gathering data and reporting on it. So the other thing is that at the end, once firms become certified, so if they become certified at the end of this 12-month period, they have the opportunity to send their newly promoted underrepresented partners to one of our client forums. And client forums are opportunities to network and connect with and learn from leading legal department lawyers. We've historically had about 80 to 90 legal departments that participate. A lot of them are now the legal departments that participate in the Mansfield rule for legal departments. And we've gotten amazing feedback. It's a great opportunity for them to hear from the mindset, sort of the mindsets and priorities and what's on the mind right now of legal department lawyers who are their potential clients. Many of the newly promoted partners have spent most of their whole careers in law firms, so they don't have as much insight into the client side of things and how that works. And they come back to their firms having made connections with potential clients or even existing clients, and having learned a few new things about what's going on with those clients that they are now in a position to share back with the firm and, be seen as somebody who's plugged in to what these clients are valuing and prioritizing. And that in turn puts them in a better position to ultimately be considered for promotion to a leadership role. So it all kind of ties together into a loop. And then we also have the last thing I think I'll mention, and then I'll ask if there's any questions, is that we have a part of our certification called Certification Plus, and that is for firms that have not only considered 30% underrepresented lawyers, but have achieved 30% underrepresented lawyers in a big number of their leadership roles and promotions. And firms that achieve Certification Plus can send their newly promoted underrepresented lawyers to not only the client forums, but also to participate in small group and one-on-one pitch meetings with clients. And so this is amazing exposure for them to get to meet directly and pitch their expertise to legal department lawyers. And they also receive feedback on their pitches. And we share that with them. We compile it and share anonymously. So it's a rare opportunity for them to hear about what their strengths are and what they could improve on in pitches. And many of them through the last few years have brought in new business or expanded business with existing clients after having the opportunity to participate in these pitches. So that's a sort of added element for firms that achieve that extra level of certification. So that's sort of my Mansfield rule in a nutshell. I could probably go on talking about it for the rest of the hour, but I know you have a lot of other topics you want to cover. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any in the next few minutes.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I want to open it up right away to see if folks have questions here. Feel free to raise a hand or we can try unmuting. Well, there are a lot of people. I do see, okay, I see there is a question that came in directly to me in the chat, which I will share with you. Are there specific strategies or ideas you can share on this approach for a small to medium-sized legal services organization? What you've discussed so far seems mostly applicable to large firms and might be hard to implement in a small nonprofit organization that has fewer opportunities for promotion and attracts fewer candidates.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a mid-sized Mansfield rule, which is for firms with 25 to 150 lawyers. And that is geared a little more towards a smaller organization. And you're right, whoever asked the question, you're right that the original that I was going through is a little more geared towards bigger firms that have a pretty substantial volume of hiring and promotions over a given year and a decent number of leadership committees. So we have the mid-sized Mansfield rule is actually, it has an 18-month certification period to allow more time for hiring and things like that to take place, since they may hire they're probably not hiring, 30 people a year or 60 people a year, maybe more like 10 or fewer. So so we do have the mid-sized Mansfield rule, which maybe we should call it the small dash mid-size, because it really is much more geared towards the structure and pace of hiring and promotions in a smaller firm. But still, I think the most important thing and the most important principles still apply. The idea of tracking and documenting, even if it's a smaller number, that still is really valuable, even if it would take a period of a couple of years to really get a good, sample size. And the idea of having a specific measurable goal, like the 30%, the firms say it really does kind of flip a switch in their discussions about leadership and succession. They all cared about diversity and inclusion before joining the Mansfield rule, but having that 30% number and also the certification at the end of the year adds that little bit of pressure, so that they have sort of both things in mind, the discipline and the pressure, the sort of accountability piece. So if I think those principles of being transparent and accountable would still work in any size of organization.
Thank you. Other questions? Any folks here from firms or legal departments that are certified that anyone is aware of? I assume there are in Massachusetts. I hope there are. So we have another question from Jermaine in the chat, asking if you could speak on the issue of retention within firms. And he says he's seen the level of hiring at the summer associate level, but lack of retention overall over the years.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the reasons that we focus we're so laser focused on leadership is that most big firms and mid-sized firms have done a pretty good job of hiring diverse entry-level classes and summer associate classes, but you do see a drop off when you look at the numbers moving up the ranks. So regarding retention, one of the things that we do think the Mansfield rule helps with is that by gathering data and firms seeing who is the candidate pool for equity partner promotions this year, last year, the year before, And, are we making a 30% or not? We're hoping it shines more of a spotlight on where firms need to improve. Retention has so many facets to it, but I think mentoring and sponsorship, of course, and fostering a sense of belonging and inclusion are really important to retaining underrepresented associates. It's definitely not a pipeline issue. I mean, the law schools have been 50% women and hovering around 25% underrepresented racial and ethnic lawyers they've been 50% women for over 20 years and 25% underrepresented lawyers or law students for at least 10 to 12 years. So I agree, there is a retention issue, and it's really complicated, and I think maybe too much to get into here, but I definitely think that, again, the same principles of accountability and transparency should be applied to any programs that are implemented. But I think mentoring and sponsorship are really key to that piece of it.
Thanks, Lisa. Do we have any final questions before I know, Lisa, you have to take off. Any final questions for Lisa? Lisa, do you mind if we put your contact information in the chat, or if you're able to do that? That would be fantastic. If people do have additional questions and would like to reach out, we certainly understand and value the importance of understanding the demographics, and it's something that our committee has been quite involved in, which is collecting demographic information of lawyers across the state, and we'll hopefully be coming out with a report in the next few months. So that may also be helpful to your efforts too, because we haven't had that in our profession previously. And I also appreciate, you've talked about working together as a community and knowledge sharing, which is really what we're aiming to do here in this group. That is the purpose of this group. So we understand the importance of that. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this information. I hope that, people who were not aware of this, now have some interest and maybe can bring it back to their firms and their legal organizations. And also, like you talked about, how we can maybe apply this to other contexts, to smaller organizations, or even filling appointments and committees. I think all those suggestions that you made are certainly applicable. So thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
All right, so this is a great transition to our next speaker, who's actually going to talk about sort of how she has been putting some of these types of efforts into practice, maybe not this one in particular, but sort of thinking about how to increase diversity within an organization, how to make things more equitable and inclusive. And so we have Devon Douglas, who serves as the first director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Greater Boston Legal Services, which I understand is the largest provider of civil legal assistance in Massachusetts. Correct me if I'm wrong. She was previously the Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Tulsa, but now is a local Bostonian, I believe. And so Devon, we've had a chance to work with her, and she is just a tremendous leader in the DEI space. Again, someone who I've gotten to know through some of our efforts. We are collaborating with in terms of management and supervisory training. Devon has hit the ground running at GBLS, and so she's going to talk about some of her early efforts to really get this work going. And I think you're all just going to love her. So Devon, over to you.
You know, you're not supposed to overpromise and underperform. Now,
Oh, that's not gonna happen.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction, Heidi, and thank you all for being here today. As Heidi said, my name is Devon Douglas. It's Devon, not Devin. My dad's name is Devin. I'm named after him, and I wear that badge proudly. But my name is Devon. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am Black, I am Pawnee, and I'm currently sitting on land of the Massachusetts people and the Pawtucket people. This is stolen land that I'm sitting on currently. And the reason why I mention that, not only because I'm an Indigenous person, but it is a reminder to us all that justice is not done, that there's still work to be done in this country around lots of different things, but specifically around the plight and the trials of Indigenous and Black folks in this country. So with that being said, how are y'all doing? I hope you're having a great day. Super sad that everybody's they don't all have their camera on right now, but I'm assuming that's because you're just treating this kind of like a podcast. It's 1:38 on the East Coast. You're eating your lunch. You don't want to be embarrassed by the way hot wing sauce drips down your face. And I understand that. That's perfectly fine. You all can stay muted and your screen off. That's perfectly fine with me. I love visual feedback. And so I'm counting on the 10 of you to be my people. Yes, Judy is just outside having a good time. Jessica, hey girl. I see Susan. Hey, those are my colleagues. Hi, colleagues. Hey, Gavin. Good to see you, bud. So glad to see everybody. So let's just jump right in. So our last speaker talked about how she's been at Diversity Lab for 6 years. And I have been at Greater Boston Legal Services for 6 months. So a little bit different. I have, as Heidi said, previously worked in government, New Jersey Attorney General's office, the city of Tulsa's mayoral office, as well as Harris County, which is the 3rd largest county in the country, where Houston is the county seat. I was the director of community engagement. So I'm a lawyer like you all, but I am not a glutton for punishment. So I did not take the bar, and I don't practice because I know myself. And I know one of the things about myself is that I like to tell people the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And sometimes as an attorney, you have to hold back a bit. But when you're in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you get to tell people the truth all the time, and they can take it or leave it. And so that is what I love about doing policy work, because I know that I'm right. I know I'm right from the beginning. I've done the research. I know what I'm talking about. So I feel very comfortable in what I'm doing. All right. So God bless all of you all who have decided for whatever reason to practice law. Okay. So just a little bit about kind of what we've been doing at Greater Boston Legal Services. For those of you who do not know, Greater Boston Legal Services was founded in 1900. Okay, so in its 100 years, or over 100 years, GBLS has had several executive directors. And about 10 years ago, we had our first Black woman as executive director, and that is Jacqueline Bowman. And in all of that time, GBLS has also had an affirmative action director. And I think that started 80s, 70s. And of course, that has now shifted. That language is outdated. And with the combination of that outdated language, no longer being legal, and also with the combination of everything that's been going on in our country, building up over the last few years, many of us in this space who've become historians actually in real time would describe Trayvon Martin's murder as kind of the impetus. Others would place it at Michael Brown Jr. But the big piece, the part that we really saw a huge shift, of course, was during the COVID pandemic with the murder of George Floyd. And that is when we saw a lot of organizations, both in the legal sector as well as other nonprofits, in corporations, in government, in our schools. We saw this, oh my gosh, we should not hate Black people. What have we been doing? We should probably get on top of that. And not only that, but then we also saw, look at this example of injustices. What are some other areas where we are not doing our best? And so GBLS responded to that by hiring an amazing woman named Devon Douglas. And that is what brings me here today. So in the last 6 months, what have I been doing? Well, besides getting used to snow, I've been working on several different things. One thing that we have learned is that when people think of diversity, equity, inclusion, we often think about race. In fact, at GBLS specifically, and you may have seen this at your own organizations, there are affinity groups around race, right? We have a group called the Racial Justice Committee, right? And so people thought of my role as being very race-based. In fact, the job description was race focused. And what we are doing at GBLS is expanding that definition a bit. And it's not that people don't know that, it's just that that's not where our minds go first. And so what we've been really discussing and kind of hammering in is that race is one part of our identity. So is our gender, so is our class, so is our sexuality, so is our religion. And depending on the city that you live in, the region you live in speaks a lot to your experience. For example, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I was the chief resilience officer, we found that there were zip codes in North Tulsa, which is historically Black, the home of Black Wall Street, Greenwood, that had a life expectancy of 15 years less than their white counterparts, or even not just the white counterparts, but just the fact that it was in a different zip code, in a wealthier zip code, right? And so geography can speak to who we are as well. And then of course, there's the big geography issues across the country and of course, globally, right? So there's all of these different aspects of our identity, and we've been really digging into intersectionality at GBLS. The other thing, as Heidi mentioned, is structural things, and also something that Lisa touched on, what I like to call making the implicit explicit. We talk about promotions and that, well, the people who need to know will find out eventually. They will do the work to find out how to be promoted. They'll seek out the people. But what we also know is that because of how white supremacy has shown up in our organizations, because of the way misogyny and classism have shown up in our organizations, is often difficult for people who grew up in poverty, for people who are who identify as women and femmes, and for people who are people of color that are underrepresented. We don't go out looking for those types of things for many reasons, as many reasons as there are people in this profession. But some things we see is like that imposter syndrome. I'm super hyped right now and I'm full of energy because less than a week ago, I got to hear Cornel West speak. It was so good. If you missed it, you missed it. What can I say? Cornel West was basically my uncle throughout that. It felt really good to have my uncle speak life into me. And then when I got to get up and answer or ask a question, he complimented my outfit. So I just feel like, I mean, Gavin, it was, I mean, you saw it. It was amazing. Like Cornel West and I are now best friends. That's how I'm viewing it. But one of the things he talked about is that imposter syndrome. Basically, imposter syndrome is white supremacy and these other types of ways of thinking set up in your heart. They take in residence in your soul. And we start to believe those things. The other thing that I've noticed is that talking with people at GBLS is that we need more words around this. How many of you all work in an organization and sometimes it feels like either A, you're on the side of, oh my gosh, how does everybody not know what intersectionality means? Or you're on the side of, what are these newfangled words that everybody keeps talking about? And I don't have any idea what they mean by microaggressions, right? So one of the things that I am like hammering home right now in conversations one-on-one and also developing some policy around language use at GBLS. What is a microaggression and how do we, as caring and concerned advocates and colleagues, how do we respond to the microaggressions that we see when they're directed at us and when we are just privy or witness to them? So that has been an adventure. Another thing for those of you who are maybe interested in getting involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion in your workplaces, one of the great joys of my work is fielding calls from folks who are having just a tough time. So I deal with well-being in a very practical way. I've had colleagues call me in tears that they have a coworker who said something really kind of harmful in front of a client. I've had people contact me about coming out of the closet and how is that going to affect them in their legal practice. I've had people say things like, well, I'd like to talk to you about the fact that I'm not racist, even though people at my job think I'm racist, right? I get those conversations as well. So just to let you all know, it's not all fun and games and planning about big, huge, exciting things that we are doing right now. A lot of it is counseling and therapy, quite honestly. And I think that that's important to this audience in particular, because it is, as I jokingly said before, I get to say what I want to say and I'm right and I know that I'm right, but I understand that we're all approaching this coming from different experiences. If you are a white trans woman, your experience is different from a Black cis man, right? Your experience is different. Well, if we can figure out how to talk with each other and to each other instead of past each other in these intersections, then we're all the better for it. The other thing that I bring to the table, and one of the things that I like to talk about, is because I really hit the ground running in Oklahoma. I am used to making the argument for diversity, equity, and inclusion to people who don't want to hear anything about it. I don't know if I know we have people from all over the country in the region on here. I don't know if any of you all live in Oklahoma. I don't know if you've ever visited Oklahoma or you've heard the word Oklahoma on the news. You know what I'm talking about right now. Oklahoma is nothing like Massachusetts. Say, for example, the premier senator of Massachusetts, right, is Elizabeth Warren. And the premier senator for Oklahoma is Senator Inhofe, who is famous for bringing a snowball to the floor of Congress as evidence that global warming and climate change did not exist. So a little bit different, right? Those were the people that I had to learn how to make DEI arguments to, help them understand. I think, what was it? We had this event called the ROI, right? So using language that a group already understands and is comfortable with, and changing ROI, the return on investment, to the return on inclusion. How does it help your bottom line to be inclusive? How does it help your shareholders when you hire people of color and queer people and women, dun, 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 right? How is that beneficial? And so the kind of like whirlwind adventure for me has been, I don't have to explain these things in the same way because my colleagues and the organization and our board understand that there is a reason why this is important. The difficulty that has come in and the challenge, and what I invite, they pay me to do it, so I'm happy to do it, is to help people better understand what this looks like practically. Yes, you can have good feelings in your heart about how to treat people, but what does this look like in policy format? What does this look like in your practices? Good feelings are good, but they do nothing to lift Black people out of poverty. Good feelings are lovely, and it's a nice thing to say as an affirmation in the mirror in the morning, but it does nothing to make sure that immigrants are not being separated from their children, right? It does nothing to ensure that in legal services that we're closing down our shop, because that's the ultimate goal, right? Jessica Drew, actually, who's on the call today, when I asked her 6 months ago, what is your long-term dream for your work? Her long-term dream was that she didn't have a job anymore, right? Eliminating poverty, eliminating the need for legal aid so she can come make $200,000 at Skadden, okay? That's what we're trying to do. That's the goal here, right? But in all seriousness, the things that have happened since I've got to GBLS give me hope. The fact that people are so open and honest with me tell me that there is a desire and there is a need. There is a true like guttural feeling inside my organization to not do things the way we've always done them, to make sure that our policies, practices, and procedures, and our physical environment, the 4 Ps, all align with our values Because again, values are good, but it means nothing if you can't deliver on them. One of the other things that we've been shifting at GBLS is on the budget side. Budget equals values. I learned that. I used to work at Oklahoma Policy Institute, which is connected to the Center on Budget at the national level. And that is something that we drove home constantly. Budget equals values. So what we, obviously, as the sentence states, what we budget for tells us what we really care about. If you have a concern about diversity, equity, inclusion being a priority in your organization, one of the first ways to make sure that that is known as a priority is to give money to that thing, whatever that is. You don't have a DEI director yet, so you have a racial justice committee or some type of access committee. Give them a budget. Somebody someone who's running those things, give them a salary bump for the time that they are overseeing that project. Pay marginalized people, okay, full stop. That's the end of my sentence. And then also specifically pay marginalized people when you are asking them to give so much of their identity. One of the things that I talk about to people that I'm mentoring who are in undergrad about this type of work is you are going to put out a lot as a DEI person. That's something you're going to do if you're in the DEI space. And if you hold any marginalized identity, people are going to have a lot of questions for you about your identity in particular. People have a lot of questions for me about being queer, about being Black, about being Indigenous, about being a woman, about growing up in the projects. And while I welcome it because I love diversity, equity, inclusion work, I love this work, there are times there weighs on your soul. And I think we all should be mindful of that, of how, when we speak to people, how it weighs on them. How are we contributing to their trauma, their pain and suffering? Maybe, you know, after another Black person is killed, the first person you want to talk to about it at work, you don't need to talk to a Black person. You just don't need to do it. I could guarantee if I was a betting woman, I would put money on the fact that your Black colleague does not want to talk to you about a Black person being killed, right? Maybe when we see things like even something not as drastic, we talk about how Judge Jackson has been treated in the last few weeks. I don't need to talk to you about that. I'm glad you want to talk about it. But maybe not water cooler conversation, because as a Black woman seeing Black grief on display in the way that it has been, it's been traumatizing for me. I've had to unplug from that. So these are the things that we're considering, trying to become more fluent in empathy at GBLS. And yeah, I think there's so many things that I could talk about, starting the Diversity Digest. We are restarting up the affinity groups. We're recreating the mentorship program, but this time helping people understand that mentoring just doesn't go top down, but it can also go bottom up. There are plenty of things for seasoned attorneys and seasoned paralegals and seasoned secretaries to learn from people who are less seasoned and vice versa. And then across practice area and also across positional authority. So those are some of the things we've been doing. Oh, of course, how could I forget? GBLS is a part of the 2022 cohort of the Shriver Center's Racial Justice Institute. Super excited about that because last year we didn't make it, but now that I've been hired, we did. So, you know, don't want to toot my own horn, but honk, honk. The other thing we're doing is really focusing on external outreach. I am a full believer in the disability rights, or the phrase that came out of the disability rights movement in the United States. And also I want to say out of the Polish, like not revolution, but like the Polish movement, nothing about us without us. It is absurd for a group of people that serve a group of people to say that I, the servant, know so much more about your experience than you do. Hello, let me introduce you to myself. I am your savior. Applaud, right? And that may seem ridiculous, but that is how it is viewed from the perspective of the person who needs help. Ask me how I know, because that's what we experienced when we lived in poverty when I was a kid. Social workers, lawyers, police officers, state government workers would come into our literal space, into our 700 square feet, and tell us, you're not doing this right. Mom, if you want to be a really good parent, this is how you'll budget. This is how you'll do it. You could get out of poverty if you would just do this. You could do that. Never asking her babies how we could be successful as a family. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about, the kind of work that we've been doing. And I'm sure there are no questions, so we can move on to Gavin. But yeah, this is me in a nutshell, a large nutshell, I think, as I talk. I don't remember when I started talking, so I'm just going to stop now because I'll talk all day because I like the sound of my own voice. So it's not a good thing to let me talk without a honk honk button because I sound great. So
Devon, we love hearing you talk, and we are so fortunate that we now have you here as part of the Massachusetts legal community. And I'm sure everyone here can agree that we are all looking forward to seeing the results of all of your wonderful work. And I hope you continue to go on a speaking tour, because you are just fantastic, so passionate, so enthusiastic, just wonderful to hear. So I am going to open it up for questions at this point. So if people have questions of Devon, please feel free, jump in, raise a hand.
Chat, raise your hand,
Chat.
all the things. I can hear you talking. Thank you so much. If you like the way I talk, you should hear me sing. I'm a singer by.
That's next meeting.
Yeah, next.
We'll have you back.
I'll be auditioning for stuff in Boston. So when we find out, I'll let y'all know. Just lots of thanks. Thank you. Thank you all so much. This has been fun.
We do have a hand, Debbie.
Oh, April is about to play some songs. Do you realize you just shared your screen and we listening to R&B chill? Do you realize that, April? Did you do it on purpose? Okay.
Girl, I was trying to give you some props and I'm pressing buttons and I see it share screen. And am I still sharing the screen?
No, you're not. You're not.
No, but that was
great.
great.
That brought me so.
That was great.
I cut you off, April.
Oh,
Deborah.
My apologies, everyone.
No worries.
I should have played some music for Gavin's intro, but
Yeah,
Gavin,
you
got
should.
this.
let's
I
take
love
a
your
question
energy.
from Debbie. Thank you.
Hi.
Yes,
I
Debbie,
love
go
your
for it.
energy. So thank you for sharing. And many years ago, I worked for Cambridge General Legal Services, which is part of now Greater Boston Legal Services. So I have a question though. I co-chair the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee of the Mass Collaborative Law Council.
Okay.
And we've done a lot of internal work. I have taught on the college level, DE and DEI kind of classes. However, the challenge is trying to get professionals involved in working things out amicably. I mean, we all have to file certifications that we talked to our clients about mediation and some of the litigation that we do, but collaborative law is another process for resolving matters amicably. And we're trying to get more professionals and clients involved in the collaborative law area. And I don't know if you have any suggestions for us of some things that we could do to bring more professionals involved in this. I don't know if you know much about collaborative law, but it's where we use a team approach to resolve conflict. On the team are 2 lawyers, 1 for each party, and then a collaborative coach who helps with who's trained in mental health, who helps, run the meetings and is the neutral. And sometimes we bring a financial professional in as part of the team. It's a great process, and it helps resolve. It really helps resolve conflict. And in all the collaborative cases I've worked on, when we've used the coach model, I've settled every single one of them.
First of all, that sounds amazing. That's really, really cool. And I want to know more about it. So I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. And so I want to know more about it. When you say you're looking for more professionals, I'd like to clarify. Do you mean you want more people of color to participate, or more marginalized folks, generally speaking, to participate? Or do you just mean professionals, generally speaking, should be more in tune to this, what I would say is a more indigenous practice of, or similar to circle sentencing kind of thing? What are you?
We have done the internal training. We've had trainings come from other folks on the national level to teach us internally. So I think we get it. We did it last year, and we've done it this year. But more people of color, more people from affinity bars. We want to get more involved because our population is diverse.
Right.
And I when I first got on, I'm on the board of directors. When I first looked around, I said, wait, most people are white. There's we have a one Black gentleman who's a financial professional, a couple folks that are of Asian background, and a handful of men, and then a lot of women. So I'm just, I brought it up, and I said, and I became chair. Now I'm co-chair because it's someone else.
Yeah, whenever you make a suggestion, that's when you get more work.
Yeah,
so,
right. So, any thoughts?
Yes. Well, you know, I just moved to Massachusetts and I'm looking for board positions. So if you're looking for a board member, I'm your girl. And that goes for all of you. And then the next thing is it's layered, right? So we're having this issue in retention and in recruitment in GBLS. And I think that this is a part of the issue too. When you talk about historically marginalized people in this country, we're often in the position of having less economic power. So why does that matter? Well, when you don't have as much money, I mean, you don't have as much time to do stuff. And so we often are either just, you don't have the time because of work, or you're taxed because you are the queer person or the Latina or the, DACA recipient who's asked to do everything, right? Like, I'm asking right now about board membership, but when I was in Tulsa, when I was in Houston, I constantly had to turn folks down because I was the only one. So it's a few and far between thing. So in the long term, the issue that we do have a pipeline issue, right? We have a pipeline issue in this country because another pipeline, the school to prison one, as well as like school to like being consistently like evicted and in poverty and that happens on because this is often gendered, right? We have a pipeline problem, right? We definitely have a pipeline problem. In the immediate term, one of the things that happens in communities of color is that relationships are less kind of regimented, right? So people don't belong to organizations. They're not a part of as many affinity groups. And so there has to be more relationship building. I mean, that's the short of it. It's creating the relationships with individuals, which takes more work, but I think that the payoff is there. And then of course, connecting with the organizations that folks do like the easiest, let me tell you something, the easiest way to connect to Black folks, Black professionals, is Black Greek life. I mean, it just is. Most Black people who have graduated from grad school, or quite a large number of them, are in Black Greek letter organizations. You have a lot of Black folks in Black Greek letter organizations. Also, even though this number is shifting and people may feel uncomfortable with this, are religious spaces. Black and brown folks love church, okay? Love our churches, our synagogues, and our mosques. It's our jam. It's where we have a good time. And so connections with those organizations is where it's at. Every weekend, people ask me what my weekend is. Well, it used to be before the world shut down. Saturday was Greek life or something that I was doing Greek life related or volunteering. And Sunday was church and brunch. So those relationships, like relationship building, is so very important in communities of color. We've seen this as well at Greater Boston Legal Services with our Asian Outreach Unit. It's relationship building. It's community. It's all about relationship building, because those typical things that we do countrywide are a little bit different in those various communities. But Deborah, like I said, I'm going to put HBCU, that's the other one, HBCU alumni groups. Yes, absolutely. And then what I found, even because I went to a Greek life thing here this past weekend here in Boston, even if you're not, you just show up into the space, then that's often enough, because people are so surprised that no one pays them any attention. We had a huge turnout at this event for one of the Black fraternities this past weekend, and the police showed up, as they do, and they were like, well, what's going on? And we explained what it was. And then they were like, this is so cool. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think I know one of my captains is a member of that fraternity. It becomes a whole thing, and it's a whole thing. But I will say, I think that is the best thing, is to do relationship building. But there are specific organizations that I would love to connect you to in the next days, weeks, as I'm going to be participating in Boston While Black. And if you all have heard of that, for those who live in Boston, huge deal that I think you all should be connected with. Their very first time having an in-person conference, and that's going to be happening late this month. So yeah, Boston While Black is super dope. Tell all of your Black friends about it. I mean, if they ask, don't just walk up to Black people and be like, hey, you live in Boston? Have you heard of Boston While Black? Then that won't go well. But yeah, Deborah, I think that your organization is on the right track. And I think that you're right to do the internal work first, right? Because a lot of people are like, I want to recruit people in. They end up harming folks, right? And then you get people who are like, I'll do this for 1 year and then I'm gone. And please don't ever call me again, please. So I'm glad you all did the internal work first. And like I said, I will follow up with you with some other organizations, but I think it's a long game. Unfortunately, I really do believe that it's a long game. Yeah, and Gavin, if Gavin agrees, then I feel like I did the right thing, because I look up to Gavin. So the twins.
So
Gavin,
yeah, that's right. Devon, can you put your contact information in the chat? Because I am sure that there are a number of folks here who would love to follow up with you and connect with you.
Absolutely. And I do want to say, this is something that happens literally, it just happened yesterday. I have 2 S's at the end of my last name. So it is D Douglas, double S like dessert, not desert. Double S like Frederick Douglass. Okay, there we go. So that is and it'd probably be easiest for you to just copy and paste, because people do forget the second S. Thanks.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your energy. And so what I'm gonna let Gavin close our meeting here in the last 5 minutes. Thank you, folks, for all staying with us. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time for breakout groups this time, but as we know, we're always flexible here in this space, and so we just had some wonderful speakers. So I want to turn things over to Gavin to close up the meeting at this point and talk about some of our efforts at the SJC Standing Committee. Gavin.
Sure. So first off, obviously, I just want to thank Lisa and Devon so much that what they've given us today, and the fact that they gave up their time and energy today to be with us when they could have just been sitting at their computer doing the job that they're getting paid to do, which probably they're not getting paid enough to do, is important. And we're so grateful that they took the time. I just wanted to, as many of you, so for those who don't know me, my name is Gavin Alexander. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am the fellow of the SJC Standing Committee on Lawyer Wellbeing, and my focus is on the intersection of well-being and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the legal profession. As many of you know, but maybe not all of you, we published a report in February of 2021 outlining a collected series of lived experiences, requests, observations, and issues flagged by members of the affinity bar associations of Massachusetts, reflecting what they go through on a day-to-day basis as lawyers in Massachusetts in the 2020s, and noting that we still have a long way to go when it comes to equity and inclusion among lawyers, let alone how we serve our clients. So our next step from that report was we have organized 4 working groups to come up with actual concrete recommendations to improve well-being for underrepresented lawyers in different legal sectors. Because as we know, these things, as you even heard in the questions today, what can work at a massive firm is probably not going to work at a small nonprofit. So we have 4 working groups going. One is for large firms, one is for small and medium-sized firms, one is for private in-house counsel departments, and one is for the public sector, particularly public agencies and legal services organizations. Those working groups have been meeting for around 5 months now. And the recommendations we're trying to get at, I think while a lot of what Divan talked about was the crucial work of changing culture and changing minds and changing hearts. What we're really trying to focus, and that is like obviously critical to the overall work of the improving the well-being of lawyers from underrepresented communities. What these recommendations really are is trying to focus on actual structures that can be changed, policies that can be put in place. All of these different types of procedural or process-oriented disruptions to the status quo that have existed so long and that have left room for bias in retention, promotion, recruiting, compensation, you name it, opportunity, credit, you name it. So we're really digging in on those types of things. And I'm seeing some messages to me in the chat. If anyone is interested in getting involved in that work at any point, I'll drop my name in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. There is always room to join the working groups, although we're sort of more than halfway through our reviews here, but always room to join. And if you're curious, if you ever just want to bounce an idea off someone in terms of when, even as Divan said, sometimes it's not the best idea to just go up to a Black person and say, how are you feeling about Black trauma today? If you want to bounce an idea off someone who does this work full time and who might not have that same sort of DEI related internal trauma, I'm happy to help you folks think through ideas, whether it's on an individual or institutional level. The SJC Standing Committee just wants you all to know that this is something we're 100% paying attention to. We view the intersection of equity and inclusion as a well-being issue, because when equity and inclusion and belonging don't exist, the well-being of lawyers and law students and judges from underrepresented communities suffers. So we're here, we're working. If you have any questions or want to get involved, let me know. If you want to talk through ideas, let me know. And thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us today.
Thank you, everyone. Please mark your calendars for the next meeting, which is going to be June 14th, but I will also send out information. And again, thank you so much to all of our speakers, and thank you to all of you who have spent the last hour and 15 minutes with us. It's great to see folks. So please enjoy the rest of the day. Please get outside. It's beautiful out. Yeah. And again, great to see everyone. And even folks all the way from Dublin.
Wow. And thank you, April English, for the brief, almost musical interlude. That was awesome.
Always. Oh, and April's turning the music on now.
I just love it. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Everyone.